Hi guys, welcome back to Just Talking, where I talk at you and you sometimes listen. So today we're doing a history video on Blackpool Pleasure Beach, which is located in the northwest coast of England, and it was the tallest roller coaster in the world at one point, and is the tallest coaster in the UK. And we're just going to talk about its construction, its future, its opening, and some more little bits here and there. And if this did teach you anything, or you just enjoyed yourself, make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and let's get into its construction. So its construction began in 1992 by Aerodynamics after being designed by Ron Toomer, and these were both American people. Of course, Ron Toomer is credited for over 93 roller coasters in total, and this is probably one of his most iconic ones, and is remembered by lots of people worldwide, both in the UK, in America, and in the rest of the world. So by the time it was fully constructed, designed and, manufactured, it cost £12 million, which by today's standard is actually quite cheap for roller coasters, as some of the coasters in the park have actually cost 16 million and 18 million. So this was actually a relatively affordable coaster given its size and length. So the track was airlifted from Bolton, where it was manufactured, to Blackpool, and was stored in the nearby airport in the large hangar space and some of the tram station areas. And it was transported down the promenade, in the south area of the promenade, to the park by closing the road and bringing out big sort of trucks and tractors and pulling it across. And here you can actually see some of the support structure for it. And some of the track pieces were actually stored along this pathway here and on the other side of the road. And of course, they did make sure that traffic could still flow through at some point. And of course, they were stored on the road for a few weeks before they were of course lifted onto the track, so then they could continue construction. So firstly, the foundations were fitted onto the ride, then the supports, which are seen here, and then lastly, the iconic red track. And then, of course, the track was painted in its colours because, not all of the parts, still had all of the coating on it. And, they just wanted to give it an extra coat of paint. So then, obviously, the salt from the air by the sea didn't actually wear it down as fast. Of course, there is still rusting due to the high salt content that it faces by just wind, rain, and other variety of elements. And of course, I do paint it every few years or so, just to make sure that it looks quite nice. And yeah, of course, if you do watch the documentary on the big one where Seagulls Dare, you can actually see some of the construction workers and painters, which are actually just suspended by a harness and, a cable to the track, and they're painting the full supports, and there are birds flying, and, it's very high up, and they're getting coffee given to them from up on the top of the track, and they have to hoist themselves back up. And that's a really great documentary if you want to see things of the history in a lot more detail and visually. So for the opening of the ride, it opened under the name Pepsi Max Big One on the 28th of May 1994. When it opened, it was the tallest at 213 feet in track length, but above sea level it's 235 feet, which the park advertises at. But the thing I always say is that, of course, if there was a little kids coaster that was about 20 feet tall on the top of Mount Everest, it would be the tallest in the world if it was above sea level, but if it was in track length, it would be one of the shortest in the world. And it was, of course, the steepest at 63 degrees as its highest vertical degree incline, but it didn't snatch the title of the fastest, but it was actually pretty narrow. So it lost its title of the tallest in the following 2 years to Fujiyama in a park in Japan, standing at approximately 230 feet. Some people have said it's 225 feet, so I'm not exactly too sure about the value, but that's more of a rounded estimate. And its top speed at the time, which was 74 miles per hour, of course now it is about 85 miles per hour. That's just because they've changed some of the cars, so then it's a bit lighter so it can go faster. And, of course, some of the operations have changed, which, have meant that it goes faster, and some of the retracts have meant that, of course, some of the elements are a bit more vertical and a bit smoother so it can maintain its speed a lot better. But obviously that was second to Steel Phantom, which is now known as Phantom's Revenge, I believe, at Kennywood, which went to a maximum speed of 85 miles per hour. and it was one of the longest out and back coasters, which had 5,497 feet of track. I believe that value was actually increased since the retracks because they've actually widened some of the pieces as well. So that is actually probably, maybe a dozen or two feet, inaccurate. But of course it is very long, and an out and back roller coaster means that after going out of the station it goes up a chain lift, and then it goes through a series of dips, turns and other elements before returning back in a similar sort of way back into the station, so it's sort of parallel. And that's in relation to going down the first hill, going into the banked turn, and then coming back down next to the track you went down from the first hill. So the branding of the Pepsi Max ended in 2011 as in the title, but the can and the sponsorship prevails. Of course, they've allowed the can to stay there, but they just didn't want the name on it anymore. Of course, it would have been quite expensive to name a ride that, and also it is quite long to say, but a lot of people do still call it the Pepsi Max, which does kind of grind my gears, but I suppose each to their own, and it is a very iconic sponsorship. The park has seen a lot of, sponsorships from, soft drinks and fizzy pops in its time, such as Iron Brew Revolution, which of course was Revolution's branding until maybe a decade or two ago. And of course you do have Ice Blast down, which is the launch tower at where the Noah's Ark area is. So for the future of the ride is actually being retracked and has been retracked in the past few years by Tazica of Greater Manchester, and there are plans to retrack most of the ride just to make sure that it's nice and smooth, and so there's no wear on any of the metal or anything similar to that. And of course the retracks have actually been really great, and they've really improved the smoothness of the ride. And of course the new painted and fresh metal looks really clean on the ride as well, instead of the sort of dusty wearing metal that is on the older tracks. So it does look really nice, and I'm really glad that they're planning on retracking it so it doesn't get any rougher than it is, because it can give you a bit of a shake after you go around that first bank turn, so I'm really grateful that they're doing that. There have also been plans laid out for the ride to be repainted in order to maintain its image, and when I was at the park in early August, they were actually getting some paint ready to paint some of the supports by the Boulevard Hotel, so I'm assuming that'll be coming in the off-season, and of course all of the retracking and all the painting goes on in the off-season, and they get it turned around really fast, so that's a really incredible piece of operation there for the park. As per usual, the train restraints and seat belts will obviously be replaced, just to make sure that the metal on the restraints doesn't get any warier than it is at the minute, because I can remember when I put my restraint down, which is due a refurbishment on the restraints in maybe like 2 years, I think. It was just a little bit rusty and a bit hard and stiff to push down, but of course they just do that just to make sure that the safety's okay, no one gets stuck in the restraint. And with the seat belts and things, that's just due to, fabric wearing, because realistically, you don't actually need the seatbelt on really any ride. The restraint is good enough. It's just more of a psychological thing where you feel more safe when you have the seatbelt as well. The only real ride where you probably need it is Grand National and some of the other woodies at the park. Hopefully there will also be some more minimalist merchandise and the logo will be remade, because I'm not a big fan of the big one that is currently the main logo for the merchandise. I think it's a little bit obnoxious and I'd like to see something new, or maybe that be a secondary logo and have a new primary one, or just maybe do it the opposite. I don't really mind too much, but I'd like to see some more merchandise that's wearable, for example as wearable as the Icon merchandise, which has really beautiful themed branding on it. Of course there's not very much theming you can do with the big one. It is just a red and blue themed roller coaster with the Union Jack on it. It's not exactly very deep with its theming or messaging, unlike Icon with the Japanese cherry blossoms and, sort of the legendary sort of myth of Icon intertwining itself in the rocks and then plunging and erecting itself from out of the Blackpool Pleasure Beach lot. You can do a lot with that storyline, but of course with the big one you can't. But I would really like to see some new merchandise for the ride that isn't as obnoxious and with a better shade of blue. So the operation of the ride will actually stay the same for the most part. Of course there will be closures taking place due to, poor weather. When it does get more windy, there is a higher chance of rollbacks and there's a lot more friction. it'll be a lot more rough. There's chance of you getting like wind in your face and then you'll come out in a rash. And there's always a chance of you getting a rash from the wind on it on a normal day because of how fast it goes and how tall and steep it is. And of course it is very salty air and it can be very, temporal. And with rain lashing down, it's not a very great, safety sort of side of things. So for the incidents and safety now, in July 1994, 26 people out of a train of 30, after the computer system failed to stop a train which was coming into the station, it failed to stop it, and of course that resulted in a collision with the empty train in front. That was when, of course the riders have just got off and, people are going to come and get into the train. So there was no one injured from the train in front, just the front people to the train behind, which was of course failing to stop. And that's really unfortunate. Those people were sadly taken to hospital, especially on its first year of operation, but luckily no one died or had some sort of severe injury that really impacted their life. Another collision of a similar computer system failure happened in August 2000, and I'm not too sure where that happened, if it was in the station again, but of course now the computer system has been advanced and it's now in the standard that, all roller coasters are in today. Of course, things like that were actually pretty common back then, which is very sad, because, programming wasn't the best and computer systems could easily be overridden and the like. So now it's incredibly safe for the computer system. There is no real human interaction with how the ride works, and they've changed over the brakes a few times and, made sure that they're working and not rusting or wearing away. So on multiple occasions the train has actually stopped on the lift hill and guests have had to be escorted down from right at the top or maybe in the middle. I didn't go on the big one until a few years back because, every time I'd been, there'd always been a train that would stop in the middle of the chain lift. It sometimes does that while it's testing, and it's just a little issue that's always going to happen. There's always going to be little teething issues during testing or during the day. Sometimes it can be that it accidentally trips a safety mechanism and it thinks that there's something wrong, but there normally isn't, and guests get a free walk, the big one. So a bolt from the ride nearly hit a guest, aged 4, and I'm not too sure when this was. It might have been a year or two ago, but of course something similar has happened on Top Thrill Dragster recently, and I'm really grateful that this was just a bolt, and it landed on a building nearby and then rested on the floor, and luckily no one was hurt. But of course the ride didn't necessarily need that bolt immediately replaced, and it was replaced in the following off season, and it was just replaced nice and quickly, and the ride was put back in operation, of course without the bolt at the time, because it'd be a nuisance trying to get in a maintenance team that could obviously scale the big one. So the ride is tested with sandbags on the seat just to make sure that the weight's okay, and of course with the sort of force with the weather and things like that, of course if any sand comes out there might be an issue. And before it opened they had to get permission by the airport, so that it could operate safely due to some of the planes coming in. They have little biplanes that go in the sky, they have a training school there as well, and they had to fit warning beacons on either side of the top of the lift hill. So when you are actually, along the promenade, if you look to where the big one's lift hill is on a night, you can actually see 2 red lights at the top of the hill that keep on flashing. Sometimes they're permanently on, but those are warning beacons to make sure that any planes that are flying into the airport, particularly training planes, so then they don't actually crash into the hill. So yeah, that's really it for this history and sort of future video for the big one. I really do enjoy learning about the history of the park, and I hope you do too. This has been probably my most interesting one yet with the big one because, it's so rich in history, and I do really like the one that I did on Valhalla. And if you do want to check out more of my history videos, I think I've done maybe 10, 11 now. I did a short bit on the big one beforehand in my merchandise and ride review, but of course, if you want to check that out, I'll obviously link the playlist in the end card. And yeah, I really do hope you enjoyed this. If you did, make sure to like, comment and subscribe. And yeah, this was Just Talking. Bye bye.